Hi, and welcome to Sci-Fi Author Chat. Today, I'm delighted to bring you British science fiction author and award winner, Adrian Tchaikovsky. Welcome, Adrian.
Hello.
Hello. So I've had the honor of meeting Adrian at BristolCon in 2021 and his delightful wife, Annie. And I had, unfortunately, until recently, not read any of Adrian's work, and I'm finding it quite extraordinary. As you can see, Children of Time is back on my bookshelf, and I'm about a third of the way through and hugely enjoying it. So I'm going to ask you, Adrian, about your background and about science, because we both come from a life science interest and background. So we'll just get started. And I will start by reading your bio, according to your bio on your website, adriantchaikovsky.com. Adrian Tchaikovsky is an award-winning and highly acclaimed science fiction and fantasy author with works published at home in the UK and internationally. He primarily explores deep themes such as artificial intelligence and alien awareness with epic galactic and fantastical settings. He has a deep interest in the animal world, specifically insects from his studies in zoology, and has a particular penchant for spiders. So Adrian, I will ask what is always asked of us science fiction writers. And when did you know that you would like to write science fiction and fantasy?
So when I was a teenager, my main sort of outlet for creativity was role-playing games. And then at about the age of sort of 16, 17, a series of books called the Dragonlance Chronicles were put out by Weiss and Hickman, which were basically a Dungeons and Dragons campaign turned into a series of novels. And that completely blew my mind, because prior to that, I'd have basically said that being an author and writing a book was just something that kind of magic people did on some other kind of world entirely, and then the books kind of filtered down to mere mortals below. And that just suddenly bridged that gap and thought, actually, this is the thing I could do. Yes. And that kind of there's a straight line really from that point to where I am now. Admittedly, taking into account the 15 years where I really believed I could do it, but honestly couldn't, and was just slowly kind of becoming a possible writer year in and year out, and otherwise not actually getting anywhere.
Well, that happens, and I have experience with that too, where it took decades to kind of finally get on the track I wanted to be on. So when you were in your formative years and you were reading this genre, which we both write now, like, obviously you fell in love with it through other means too, I'm sure. Were there particular films or writers or books that kind of stand out to you in your memory as being, essentially influential on your work?
Yeah, I mean, my early influences, I was a big Star Wars fan. I was a big Doctor Who fan. I mean, in fact, I was reading the old Target novelizations of Doctor Who's stories that got me into reading at all, and got me kind of took me to the library every week just to find the next one I hadn't read before. So an awful lot of it comes out of reading. A lot of it comes out of, like I say, playing role-playing games, because I was that kind of kid, and that was very much my social world, very much revolved around that kind of common imaginative pastime, because I don't really do sort of casual sociability even now. I mean, weirdly, the film I think that probably had the biggest impact on me was the Roger Corman sci-fi Battle Beyond the Stars, which is the sci-fi sort of Seven Samurai retelling.
Yeah.
Mostly because one of the characters that they recruit, one of the hero characters in that, is this scary kind of lizard man alien. And it's another one of those kind of permission moments where, just as before with the books, it was just, oh, I kind of have permission to try and be an author because this is suddenly within my world. I have permission to make non-standard characters the heroes, which I mean, obviously that's not necessarily the point of that film. You're probably meant to be cheering George Peppard and Robert Vaughan and that kind of, that guy from the Waltons whose name I can't remember. But the lizard man guy, Cayman of the Lambda Zone, was the character that stuck. And I think that being able to see that you could go further than the standard kind of square-jawed human hero was enormously important in kind of opening my imagination.
Great. Well, I have to, since you've brought up role playing, I have to kind of dig into that for a few minutes, which I've done some role playing myself. And I have to ask, because I'm suspecting this, but I mean, how many of these campaigns did you actually create? Did you create your own campaigns? And
yeah, I've never been one to, I've always created my own worlds for games. I've never really run sort of pre-made scenarios and things, or very seldom at least. And certainly for me, the freedom to kind of decide what's over the next hill basically has always been enormously attractive to me. And in fact, I mean, the one of the campaigns I ran when I was at university then eventually got adapted into my first series of published works, the Shadows of the Apt books.
I didn't know that. That's so cool. So, I mean, I think it's kind of empowering, right, to grow up and have that wonderful resource of role-playing games to kind of have this enormous playground that comes from our minds. Like, I love computer games, but I also love that with classic RPGs that it's out of thin air. We're just making this up, but we're making it up as we go along, but we're also running from this campaign that we've designed. And it's so empowering, I think, to have that creative mastery, and it's just really good training. I've talked to a few people, artists and writers, who, that was how they got their start and their permission, as you say, to kind of explore other things. So that's great. And since we're science fiction and fantasy writers with a science background, I'm going to ask you some questions about that perspective, because I was also, heavily involved in zoological studies and ecology and things like that. And I see the influence when I'm reading Children of Time. Obviously, I'm rooting for, a giant spider named Portia. So she's like one of the best characters I've come across. And, I appreciate it from a perspective of having a biology background. And I have to ask, was it always your intent to kind of thread your work with your studies, or did it just come naturally? And, do you ever veer from it and kind of just don't adhere to the science?
Well, I mean, as you'll know, with if you ask a dozen writers about sort of genre distinctions and how important they are, you'll get a dozen different answers.
Right.
But for me, because I have that kind of a mind, I very much like to know where I am on the map. And so how much the science sort of informs the book. So it was popped up with that. How much the science informs the book varies depending on how scientific I'm trying to be. So if I'm writing a fantasy book, it's probably not important. If I'm doing a space opera like Shards of Earth, it has a certain amount to say, but no more. And then if I'm writing something that's much more scientifically based, like Children of Time, I try and make it as scientific as possible, because I feel a lot of the impact comes from that. So if I was to write something that was completely fantastical, but also had some spiders in it, which in fact I have done on various occasions, it would be fine, but it wouldn't actually have the same impact on a reader as presenting the same setup, except that the science is at least obviously trying to be possible. I think that a lot of the impact with the spiders in Children of Time comes from the fact that they are actually kind of logically worked out, and they don't feel like something kind of conjured up magically.
Right.
Sort of, yes, talking spiders, it's all presented as this logical endpoint of a reasonable chain of evolution.
Right, with the nanovirus kind of driving that evolution, and yet.
Yeah, the nanovirus is that book's kind of, I mean, there's this idea that every book gets one big lie, which I'm sure you've heard, and the nanovirus is kind of a lie for that. But the purpose of it is really just to abbreviate the timescale to where I can have the plot running with the human ship, so that evolution is taking effectively tens of thousands of years rather than the millions of years that you would normally need. But the course of evolution that the spiders take is one that I've tried to make as reasonable and plausible as possible. And I mean, I do similar things with all the various alternate timelines in Doors of Eden as well.
which I look forward to reading. So that's really cool. Now, can I talk about your love of entomology? Because I kind of, at this point, am viewing you as Adrian of the arthropods. So let's dig into that a little bit. And how was this something that was lifelong, that you always had an affinity for multi-legged creatures beyond the bike?
Yeah, weirdly enough, I think it kind of comes from a sort of social isolation. So I was that very common kind of geek archetype. I was the odd kid who didn't have that many friends and didn't see eye to eye with the majority of people on most things. And what I found was I tended to root for the things that didn't have very many people kind of on their side. So yeah, I kind of felt, well, like birds and mammals and so forth have plenty of cheerleaders. I will kind of, my tribe is definitely, it's insects, it's spiders, it's reptiles, it's the things that the majority of people don't like. And that just kind of grew and grew as I went on. And I mean, aesthetically, I certainly find insects and spiders and so forth enormously aesthetically pleasing. I mean, this is one of my desk ornaments, for example.
Oh, fantastic.
Peacock spider. And I have plenty of those all over the house, to my wife's general despair. And it's turned, I think, into a very useful tool as a writer. There is definitely a tradition of using insects and spiders and things like that as a way of exploring the human mind. There's got a long, there's Pellevan and Kafka and Chapek, and that a whole series of mostly Central Eastern European work using that as a metaphor. But also, the big thing about a lot of my writing is it's to do with empathy. And Children of Time is especially to do with empathy. It's to do with two very, very different worlds trying to see each other's point of view. And on the subject of empathy, if you can make someone, like you say, root for the spiders in that kind of situation, that was the big writing challenge. Because there's nothing people hate more than spiders. There's you only have to mention a spider on social media, and someone in this comments will be saying, you've got to burn the house down or something like that. And it's enormously frustrating. And I kind of hope that I've made people like spiders a bit more through the book. But it does mean, if you want a real challenge of making people root for something alien, making it as spidery as possible, and then making them like it, is kind of the thing I was trying to address with the book.
Well, that's a fabulous thing that I've loved. I am the spider rescuer of the house. I get the glass and the cup and move them on their merry way. I talk to them. So I'm kind of in your camp, in which, obviously biased, having majored in zoology and got a degree in ecology and evolutionary biology. I was always all about animal behavior. So this is another reason I love this book. And, it's kind of my playground right now, because I'm like, oh my God, thank you. Somebody's finally writing what I wanted to read, about animals that are not, the super cute, fluffy kind. And I love that you've dug into the empathy, which I think is essential, and, helping remove us from our dominance. I'm going to put that in quotes, as a species on this planet. Like, we really need to recognize that there is an entire universe of creatures that really don't need us around, and they also don't need us to attack them and destroy them, and particularly filling a niche in ecology in which they are necessary and can take care of the bad stuff, like, virus carrying mosquitoes and stuff, which mosquitoes, that's a whole nother topic, parasitism and things like that. So I won't get into that here, but we'll get back to your science fiction and kind of thinking about spiders and creatures and non-conventional heroes and things like that. Was there a particular subgenre of science fiction that you either watched or read, other than what you've already mentioned, that you would find like your favorite sort of subgenre of sci-fi?
I mean, when I was reading science fiction, I generally wanted to read about the aliens. And so, I mean, there's a whole genre of stories about, people go to alien planet, explore, find alien race. Usually there are ruins and there's some ancient sort of elder precursor. And I always loved that kind of story. And I have since gone on to write that kind of story on a number of times, but my focus, rather than because of the sort of science fiction story that these, because of the sort of story these particular books told, and especially the sort of story that was pitched towards kids at the time, they were very kind of much almost colonialist fables, and the aliens were generally very ignorant or very problematic in various ways, and the people were very kind of, we are bringing you the benefits of our wonderful Earth civilization. And that's kind of where I stopped telling that story in my own work, and I'm far more interested in the aliens themselves. I mean, obviously they're children of time, is to a certain extent that kind of narrative, but I've probably done at least sort of 4 or 5 different looks at that general corner of the genre. But it's all, the interesting thing, it's not really to do with, yes, I will tell a story about manifest human destiny. It's far more about, I will do something interesting with the aliens. I will do something, and especially do something interesting with the aliens that then lets me turn a lens back on the humans and kind of look at them. Because it's easy to think of up aliens who are not as good as us.
Right.
And the majority of science fiction aliens kind of fall into that category. Even in fairly enlightened science fiction settings, you often get these aliens are kind of like people, except they can't do this, or they're like people, but they only have this one emotional state or something like that. And it's just kind of, they always basically turn out to be person minus, I suppose. And I'm much more interested in thinking, well, let's have some aliens that do things better than us. Let's have some aliens that we can learn from, rather than aliens that are there to be taught, so to speak.
How would you view in that case, just because I'm a nerd, how would you view Superman in this sort of framework?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point. I suppose I've got to say, I always forget Superman never falls into that category in my head of aliens.
Right.
Partly, I guess, because he looked enormously human. But yes, I suppose technically, yes, he's an alien, and he's an alien. Although, oh God, you know what? I'm not entirely sure I could tell you a great deal about the Krypton kind of society.
That's fine.
Because they're only kind of known for one thing, which is blowing up.
Yeah.
I don't think they blow themselves up. I think it's like a natural disaster sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's only superpowered when he hits Earth. If I got it, I was the Christopher Reeve Superman with a huge thing with me when I was very young. I used to run around. Me too.
And you can
I used to get my mum to make me a Superman cloak and run around.
Yeah.
But I guess for me, it's, even though he comes from space, it's not really an alien story, because he's completely humanized, apart from all the amazing superpowers. But also there's the Superman stories I'm familiar with aren't really interested with his alienness or the place he comes from or anything like, which obviously is gone anyway, or anything like that. It's just kind of, it's a particular explanation for why there is this guy with superpowers, rather than a sort of an actual sort of science fictional alien.
Right.
Sort of, an exploration of the alien at all.
Yeah, and I think that, it's been dug into some, but I haven't really seen it on such a huge scale. I like, people question his power almost more than the origin of that power, and the fact that he is alien. A lot of times, at least on film, they've explored it in comics, but it's kind of a fun thing to think about. But at the same time, then you think in terms of actual, sort of observer type aliens, like in Marvel's universe, where you have people sort of being this sort of removed power that's alien, and either playing with us like gods or keeping a distance. And I'm kind of interested in your take on that too. Like, what do you think of sort of a powerful presence that is either keeping an eye on us or putting a do not enter sign into the solar system? Like some people kind of lean immediately into cosmic horror for that. But, I think, would you find it a more neutral situation, or just wouldn't even matter? How would you speculate in that kind of presence?
It's interesting, because I mean, weirdly, I would say that that kind of thing. So whether you've got the aliens that are kind of placing an embargo around the Earth, or that are kind of these kind of behind the scenes masters of time and history and so forth, like that, both of those are kind of a world away from cosmic horror for me, because for me the essence of cosmic horror is the aliens don't care.
Right. So
and in those both that kind of setup where you've got like the Asgard, so in Marvel you've got the Watcher or the Asgardians or anything like that, it's incredibly Earth-centric, because I mean the Marvel universe in general is very, very Earth-centric. Everything is Earth is, if you were to build a sort of an orrery of the Marvel universe, Earth would be right in the center, and everything else revolves around it. And so, and I mean, it's that weird thing that having a monstrous alien race that wants to invade you or enslave you or control your kind of change human history of behind this, is actually, even though it sounds like a horror movie sort of trope, it's actually very, very comforting, because the aliens care.
Right.
They are deeply concerned about humanity in a way that having a kind of a sort of a monstrous alien presence that could kind of destroy the Earth, but not necessarily even realize it was there, or just in passing by the Earth, could cause sort of vast sort of madness or terror or catastrophe, but not intending to, just because of its literal presence. That's far more scary, because if it's the difference between saying, believing that a flood is punishment by a divine entity, or that the flood just kind of happens. Right. The divine entity sounds scarier, but it's actually a lot more comforting, because it does mean that there is something big out there that cares about you, even in a negative way.
Right. Instead of just a random terrible thing happening, like.
So the I mean, in a weird kind of way, the Marvel universe is relatively small, because it all contracts down to everything is very, very deeply concerned with people.
Yeah. That's one reason. Like, I love DC a lot, partly because of some of its alien characters, like Martian Manhunter, but also I also like the Infinite Earth kind of setup, which is a lot of fun, and you can have just endless fun, right, with that. But it's also, it can be a bit of a cop-out level, like on Earth 57, we don't deal with that at all. So, but do you deal at all in any of your writing with a parallel universe situation?
Well, that's so my big book for that is definitely Doors of Eden, which is the basic shtick to that is people discover that there are a whole series of Earth timelines, but rather than sort of messing about with, oh yes, in this one a different group of people won World War II, is that in this world the dominant species is evolved from trilobites. In this world they are, it's saber-toothed tigers, and this idea, it's running the clock again, but it's running an evolutionary clock. And I have a lot of fun. It's the book is interspersed with these little vignettes of, here is how it basically goes in this particular timeline. Right. Here is how this kind of race of this species of fish evolve sentience, and then this is what happens, how they face the challenges, because there are a few kind of big challenges that are going to happen. There's the Permian, things like the Permian extinction, which is enormous and is going to flatten most things. There's things like the Chicxulub impact that finished off the dinosaurs, and all of these different species. As you go through, I work from sort of the Cambrian period on up, and all the ones obviously before the Permian they're going to run into this thing and it's going to devastate them. And does it wipe them out? How did it change them? And I mean, it's not a spoiler because it turns up very early on, but the trilobites, you end up, and the modern day trilobites are colossal, immortal, spacefaring kind of ridiculous monsters, which I had enormous fun writing. But again, it's like, as with the Children of Time, the idea is all of the evolutionary timelines I'm conjecturing at least have one foot in the logic of how we understand evolution to work and that kind of thing.
Right, on Earth at any rate.
Yes, but then again, it's only Earth evolution because it's only Earth timeline, so I can get away with making a certain set of assumptions. I do look at alien evolution in some of my other stuff, and it's fascinating. It's also enormously tentative until we meet something that has evolved something evolved entirely separate to Earth. And at that point, we can work out how much crossover there's likely to be.
Right. And that's what's really extremely fun about astrobiology and kind of, like, I mean, of course, all of us nerds want to see something in our lifetimes, but, and I feel like at the very least, we're going to get some kind of signature from microbes within, definitive within our lifetimes, but who knows?
I'm holding out for the Europa probes they've got planned.
Right.
I feel that if we find something in our solar system outside Earth, Europa feels like the best bet.
Yeah, that's what it seems like to me too. And when you have things like extremophiles on Earth, that's probably the closest paradigm that's going to work there because of geologic stress and the heat, and vents and things like that. We would not, and that's a topic that's relevant right now, is who knows how that will change science, because without the extremophiles discovery, we wouldn't have PCR, which helps us have these tests for COVID, within a couple of hours. So, and I've worked with PCR myself, I'm sure you have too. So, it's like, how's that going to change life? There's the spiritual questions, but there's also the medical and scientific questions that could be all thrown. And it's just a ton of fun to think about. I could spend days just talking and writing about that. But I'll get back to, so you've written about some things that I was getting ready to ask about, which is a lot of fun. So since we're obviously kind of thinking along all these radiant lines of thought and evolution and, so of a basis in science at the very least, what would you like for your dream science fiction writing project to be? Or have you already reached that? Or is it something that's still on the horizon that you're working toward?
I mean, there's kind of the holy grail of my kind of science fiction, I think, is this theoretical book where you can present a protagonist's eye view from something that is simultaneously completely alien, but also is comprehensible to a human reader. And I feel that a lot of my work, I'm so slowly kind of inching towards that. Because obviously, you've got the spider that's still Earth life. They are, they're similar enough to us in a variety of ways. In the sequel, I do octopuses. The octopuses are considerably weirder than the spiders and were really hard to make work just on the page. It sent me into fits, frankly, to try and actually bring it over from the octopus point of view. And there's also, I've done some alien points of view, and it's all kind of approximating, but at the same time, I feel that there's still that kind of almost that Zeno's paradox, that constantly shrinking but always present gap.
Asymptotal approach.
And at some point, maybe I'll find a way to bring over something that is really, really, really alien in a manner that actually still makes sense. Because frequently you see 100% aliens, but they're kind of put over as, well, it's going to do a really random thing, and that's strange, but it's alien. And as a reader, that never entirely satisfies me, because it does kind of feel that it's kind of, at that point, it's not as alien, it's just being weird for the sake of it.
Yeah.
It's the idea of having that stuff going on, but still feeling that it does have a logic and a purpose, but the logic and purpose is not our logic or our purpose.
Yeah, exactly. It's not anthropomorphized and human-centric, and that is a delicious goal. And so I can't wait to see what you come up with there, because that's what I'd like to read. So I will get into some other semi-normal questions and then some kind of silly ones. So I would like to know, first, I want to go back, when you felt like you were allowed to have, this kind of writing because of your experience in RPGs. But I want to know, because I haven't really talked about this much before. I've talked about the writers who have influenced writers and things like that, but I haven't really asked this question. Who do you feel supported you the most to get you there, to give you that permission? Did you have someone or multiple people who kind of pushed you a little bit to help you get over anything that held you back at first as a writer?
It's one of those situations, I mean, looking back now, I would say, well, I mean, I would very much kind of, I forged my own path, and I kind of just layered away in kind of, mountaintop solitude until I finally made it. I suspect I was getting a vast amount of support from family and from friends that I've kind of edited out of the story in my own recollections, because the memory tends to work that way. And the idea of kind of, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps is a very appealing narrative. So I couldn't say, yes, there was this particular person who inspired me or anything like that. But on the other hand, I'm very much standing on the shoulder of a lot of people who've been there for me all the way through.
So I know it's probably a different scenario now being a parent, right, than it was before. You have time constraints. You have this person that you have to take care of, or persons. And so I do want to ask about that, because as a parent myself, I get asked this a lot, how do you juggle that? And, first of all, with the time management, that's a major question. How do you focus, and get this writing done? You're a prolific writer, but you're also, a family guy.
Yeah, I mean, the first few years were definitely hardest, but even then, my natural writing time at that point was very much late evening, because I was still working full time. And that worked out reasonably well. I was generally able to get stuff done sort of while on duty, as it were, when our son was very young. Since then, I've kind of moved to writing in the mornings while he's at school. And for that matter, Alex is autistic, which means that he's frequently basically amusing himself and kind of doing his own thing a lot of the time, and so he's not constantly kind of wanting me to do stuff for him. He also he's getting to a certain age where kids are generally just more sort of self-sufficient, and he's talking online with his friends and all of that sort of thing.
Right. That's been a big switch for me too. I'm like, all of a sudden they're interacting, in this whole other universe that I'm not really a part of. It's great for them, but it's also, like, it is such a juggle. But, I'm glad that you've figured that out. It is kind of a challenge, but it sounds like you've got a good system. So that's great. So what's the worst writing advice you ever received?
That's presupposing I ever listened to any advice at all.
Indeed.
There is a whole canon of things people say as writing advice that probably was said fairly casually at some point in a specific situation and then gets handed down as some sort of gospel. I absolutely hate the idea of write what you know, because if we wrote what we knew, then we'd never have science fiction to start with. No. At the same, I appreciate the idea, find out about, research what you're going to write about is probably what was meant in that, but that's, write what you know seems to preclude the idea of going and trying to learn stuff. And the way it tends to get bandied about is very reductive and not terribly helpful. Also, honestly, it's things like show, don't tell. Show, don't tell is okay as advice, as a thing of maybe you could do this another way, but it then tends to get thrown at you as, well, this is the only way you can do a thing. And if you have a single section in your book where you're just basically turning to the reader and saying, this is how things are, then that's a terrible thing. There's about a third of Children of Time is me literally just talking to the audience and talking them through the science, because there are things honestly, it is more efficient to tell than to try and show.
Right.
But I think honestly, I suspect that most advice in most fields gets like that. Things that are good guidelines tend to get passed down as hard rules eventually, and they become almost sort of a new religion of any particular craft or art form you're working with. And there's no advice that is going to be good for all weathers, to be honest.
My perspective too, but I'm always finding that it's always such a wonderful and unique answer for everybody that I ask, and I get no end of joy hearing it. So thank you. Getting back to a bit of science and science fiction, and this is this is from a science writer and an author's point of view, because I know what sources I use. Are there any, do you kind of just gather your information, your data from anywhere? Do you have like a favorite source that you go to for some of when you need to dig in a little bit for things that you're not completely a master of that help you in your scientific aspects of writing?
I mean, what I do now, because now I can cast quite a broad net on social media, I will usually go on Twitter and basically say, do I know anyone who knows anyone who has a kind of professional level knowledge of this field? Would they like to have a chat?
Right.
And there is almost always someone who has the expertise and is very happy to share it. And so far, that approach has not let me down. My previous kind of, I used to read a lot of online science journalism, and I don't read as much of that now as I should do, and actually it's something I really need to go back to. Yeah, there are podcasts and things as well. There's a paleontology podcast I credit in Doors of Eden that I'm enormously fond of, which is great fun, which is Paleontology After Dark.
Ooh, I want to look for that.
But back when I was planning Children of Time, I think it was National Geographic had a really good set of science blogs, which I followed a lot of, which all got dropped. The whole kind of online National Geographic kind of rejigged its setup, and they all went. So there were people like Darren Nash and Ed Yong and that kind of thing had some incredibly good just regular blogs they kept up, which were really, really handy. And frequently, even if they would have plenty of links and you could just kind of rabbit hole your way through a topic, and that's certainly must be where I came across the Fiona Cross research that inspired Children of Time, for example.
Excellent. Certainly
it's where I came across a lot of the papers on dog behavior that went into Dogs of War.
Yeah, like I was working on an article about feather stars for sciencing.com, and I was inspired to create an alien who incorporated kind of part of that anatomy as their subject, as a telepath, and how they would use appendages for that. So I always find like it's so much fun to read these things and be inspired by them. And you bring up a really good point that is a positive about social media, is the fact that we do have this ability to just ask a question and get an expert, in addition to a lot of other things. But you could ask an expert and most likely find one. And I find that wonderfully encouraging to writers who are starting out, and particularly in science fiction, to just go for it. Just ask those questions and there will be someone, or someone who knows someone, So that's great.
I'm currently engaged on a current project. I finished a novella about the end of last year and was just about to submit it when I suddenly thought, oh, hold on, does this bit work? Is one of those things that I just assumed when I was writing it. Obviously, I didn't even think that might be a problem. And then after I finished, I thought, actually, no, there might be a real problem there. So I've cast my net out quite recently and got a lot of 2 or 3 people giving me some really useful feedback. But it does mean the book is currently on the operating table for emergency surgery, because it was a problem and I do need to at least account for it in the writing.
Better late than never, though, right?
Really, yes. Really, and I've discovered another couple of bits. It's one of those, a little knowledge being a dangerous thing. Is it? It's, if you know about a thing but don't know enough about it to know what the pitfalls are, that's when you tend to really get yourself into trouble.
Yeah, and that's currently very relevant advice for me too. So I feel like I'm going to have to cast my own net about some things. So that's great. So what are you currently working on that you can talk about?
Oh, so I've got quite a lot of wheels turning at the moment. I'm midway. Well, the Final Architect series, book 2 is coming out and book 3 is coming out, so that's all done. But I'm, they're going to be swinging back for edits at various points. I'm literally waiting any day now for the edits on the 3rd children book, which people seem to be keenly anticipating, which is nice. So that's all kind of in the next couple of years. So I'm writing quite a way ahead. I'm doing a new series of novellas for Rebellion. One of which is the one I was just talking about with the sudden critical science error. And I'm also looking at a lot of my writing at the moment is very much going back to that idea of let's explore an alien planet. And with me, that means let's build an interesting new alien ecology.
Yes.
So I'm spending most of my time thinking up radically different sort of alien worlds, and sketching out what things look like on any given planet, and working out what the interesting quirk I want to explore with each book is.
Outstanding. Is there anything that you have that's being adapted for film or TV?
There's been some interest in Children of Time, which it's the book of mine that, if people know any book of mine, it's almost certainly going to be that one. It's a difficult one to adapt, purely because you've got a lot of it that doesn't have any people in it. Right. There have been a couple of other projects kind of being kicked around. I suspect I am not at liberty to talk about any of them because they're all kind of in that pre-announcement stage that most books never leave, as we both know. That kind of
production hell.
Optioning is cheap and actual production is expensive. So, but there's certainly nothing that's got to the point where it's on that downhill slope towards actually becoming a thing. But we live in hope.
Yeah, great. I suspect something will. So, look forward to hearing any of that happens. So you've mentioned this is we're going to get into the silly stuff now. I'm always thinking with my stomach. So, and I know that when I write, I have certain habits. So I wanted to know, is there any sort of food or drink that you like to have when you're writing?
Oh God, I live off coffee. I drink coffee when I'm writing, and I drink tea just for myself, as it were. So coffee has just become the work drug. I mean, other than that, I am, if I let myself, I'm a perennial grazer, and I have a biscuit, for example, right here. But I'm absolutely I'm trying to stop myself doing that, because it does mean I get through an awful lot of just junk over the day, if I can possibly help it. It's one of the things I try to get out of the house to write, and that's one reason is it means I don't snack all the time.
Yeah. So to get out of the house to write, where would you go?
I've got a couple of places in the local town that I can go and sort of write relatively undisturbed. There's a nearby pub, and there's a coffee place a little further in, and I go into Leeds, the city immediately on my doorstep, about once a week, and write in the Waterstones there. And it's obviously that for a couple of years that wasn't really an option. I'm just starting going back into that.
Fun, right? Now, like, oh yeah, you can go back, and
it's good because I mean also there's just I get more of a prolonged writing burst in between kind of checking Twitter, because there are fewer distractions, whereas if I find that just sitting here at my computer, as I found out, I can still write, but it's a bit more stop and start.
Right. And then the family interaction and sort of orbiting stuff in the house kind of just, I don't know about you, but it derails me. So it's kind of nice to have that removed and have this sort of ambient clinking and sort of low mutter.
What saved my sanity was immediately before lockdown, we had finally got the Loft Conversion. So that we just turned that into, this is where I will write now.
Excellent. Yeah, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, so I'm right up at the top of the house. I'm reasonably cut off what's going on below, if it's not absolutely kind of World War III sort of scale chaos. And so if I'd been writing still downstairs with Alex kind of just in the house all day and stuff like that, I think that would have worked out pretty poorly.
Yeah,
thankfully, just the timing was nothing short of preternatural, to be honest.
Yep. Yeah, that was really, really good. So good, because I just find, that's why I can't write when they're awake or here, just I can't do it. There's too many, as I'm listening for them when I don't even think I'm listening for them. And I could put on silencing headphones, but I don't want to. And I don't know if that's a parent thing, but I can't do it. So like removing myself and actually going somewhere else,
Yeah.
like a third place, I think is a good thing if one can do it. So yeah, but having that separation with the loft is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I write to music as well, so I think that also helps just sort of blot out whatever else is going on around me.
Yeah. Now, do you listen to music that has words in it, or is there instrumental, or is there any sort of?
It's got to be instrumental. I can't do words at all.
Yeah.
I have a lot of film soundtracks, and I have weirdly I discovered there's a whole genre of film soundtrack like music that is written specifically for movie trailers.
Really?
Because when the trailer's out, it's frequently before the film score has been properly recorded.
Yeah.
And I assumed, oh, well, they obviously just get some existing music. But a lot of the time, they go to these people who just write music for trailers. And especially when you're writing, say, an action sequence, these pieces of music are usually, here are 2.5 minutes of non-stop action with no kind of deviation in tone whatsoever. The hilarious thing being, once you've started to collect this music to write to, you recognize it everywhere.
Yeah. Well, now that you've said that, now I'm going to go look for it, because I'm like you, I can't handle any words. Usually there'd be some sort of cafe jazz kind of thing I can write to that, or a soundtrack, like Blade Runner 2049 or something,
That's honest. I've been listening to that even just this week. That's a really good one to write to.
How do you like the Dune soundtrack from the recent?
Yeah, the new Dune one is good. The soundtrack to the Aronofsky Noah is very good to write to.
Which one?
Noah, the Aronofsky Noah.
Oh, I haven't listened to that one.
Yeah, and there's a composer called Lorne Balfe who.
Yes. Oh yes, I love Lorne Balfe.
Yeah, he's done a lot of stuff. I mean, he does a lot of soundtracks for computer games as well. But we've got to the point where computer game soundtracks are often absolutely as good as film soundtracks, and they are frequently very, very expressive of mood. So I listen to quite a lot of computer game stuff as well as film stuff these days.
And I noticed that my boys do too, that they have gone and searched for those musicians and now they have whole playlists based off them. So I think that's fascinating. And I don't tend to play computer games much, but I'm listening in, I'm like, what's that? So, it is a whole other ecosystem of music and things like that it's not the first thing you think of, but it's there, and it's important and helps with the atmospheric quality of what you're playing in.
Also, I mean, joyously, most of the composers of these things, they have a kind of they have their little shop on Bandcamp and so forth. So if you like it, if you come across it like it, I will buy that direct from the composer right now and download it, and then you can have it, and it's there to write to, and that is brilliant, frankly.
Wonderful,
frankly.
isn't it?
Yeah.
One of the benefits of living in this time that we're in. So that's great. So I have another kind of silly question for you, and this is something I ask everyone. And I love The Thing, and I love Blade Runner, and I love all the classic, sort of thinking, slightly disturbing science fiction movies and stuff. So I always like to ask this: what's the one thing that could tip people off to your being human or not? Let's say it's like a reverse Voight-Kampff test, in which, how would they know you're human, Adrian, versus not? So, like blink twice if you're Adrian, and like,
yeah. Well, I mean, the problem is that I think the question of how would people know I'm human and how will people I know I'm Adrian are very different questions, and possibly mutually exclusive. I don't know.
Adrian, you have the other parts. So,
yeah. Well, this is it. Yeah. Is it Adrian, or is it a collection of spiders in a suit? That's the. It's tricky because I do spend so much time exploring outside the human. I mean, I tend to regard the humanity as being a collection of problems that the book has to solve, rather than the solution to any problems in and of itself. But I cannot remember for the life of me who wrote it. This puts me in mind, there was an old science fiction story I read where there are some people that get captured by aliens, and they have to try and show the aliens that they are actually intelligent life, and the aliens don't do maths, so you can't do the standard here as kind of Pythagoras's theory and so forth. But eventually they capture a small animal and put it in a cage, and it's that caging of another creature that that is proof of their intelligence as far as the aliens are concerned, which it's a bit reductive and a bit simplistic, but I kind of feel that there is something uniquely human in that way of I don't know, not leaving well enough alone, not living in peace with your environment. It's one of those things, it's got us where we are and it's going to get us where we're going, for better or for worse.
Good answer. So, I think we're coming kind of toward the end of the interview, but I want to kind of hand the mic to you, so to speak, and ask you if there's anything that I haven't asked that you'd like to talk about or like for readers to know.
Oh, Lord, I can never think of anything particularly inspired in this kind of thing. And this is indeed one of those times.
It doesn't have to be
actually, you know what, the thing I'm going to say is, I mean, I've talked about kind of like the sort of science fiction that I was reading when I was young, and all of those, the classic golden age science fiction and the yellow backed sort of books that you got ranked on in the library, and which is all grand stuff, but I honestly find myself, because so here is a confession. I have never successfully read the foundation books, for example. I have bounced off those books a couple of times trying to read them. And there are certainly other books I bounced off and then come back to and really enjoyed the second time round. I mean, Book of the New Sun was something I absolutely failed on when I was 13, because 13, I was probably not sort of an incisive enough reader to get what on earth was going on in that very, very complicated book. I will say, though, there is the best science fiction I've read, the science fiction I enjoy most, is very much the stuff that's being written now. There's an enormous wave of really, really innovative, incisive science fiction that's hitting the market right as we speak. Some of which is very much a response to where the world is and where the world is going, and some of which is just a superb exercise of the imagination. I mean, people like Arkady Martin and Becky Chambers and writers like that. There was someone complaining on I think a Facebook group, oh, no one's writing anything like Dune anymore. And I was saying, well, look, Memory Called Empire, Arkady Martin, you've got Nine Fox Gambit by Yoon-Ha Lee, you've got Ancillary Justice by Anne Leckie. For three, there are three superb books that are absolutely in the same corner of the genre as Dune.
Right.
And they are phenomenal books. And I mean, personally, I would back those against Dune any day of the week, all three of them. And I do enjoy, I am a fan of Dune. I really enjoy that. But it's not that the idea that science fiction is the thing that people were doing in the 50s and 60s, and now we are fallen from those kind of, it's like Homer lamenting the days of heroes and so forth, is nonsense, really. So I mean, I guess the drum I need to beat is that we are in it. If they're the golden age of science fiction, we're in it now.
I agree with you. I've never been more excited to be in it, and I can't wait to see what's coming next from you and from every other wonderful science fiction author out there. Adrian, thank you so much for being part of Sci-Fi Author Chat. It's been fantastic, and I look forward to seeing you again in the future, hopefully in the UK. And
well, thank you very much for having me on the show.
Thank you. All right, take care. Ad Astra.